Every bride fears something going wrong on her wedding day. I never imagined it would be another woman claiming my groom was her husband. My name is Kelly. I am 25 years old, and I am telling you this story 3 years after it happened, sitting in my living room with my daughter asleep in the next room and Stephen in the kitchen making coffee. So you already know we made it through. But getting from that day to this one was the hardest thing I have ever done, and it started not at the ceremony but 1 week before it, with a message I chose to ignore. Stephen and I met in Savannah, Georgia, at a mutual friend's birthday dinner. I wasn't supposed to be there that night at all. My plans had fallen through at the last minute and my friend convinced me to come, and I almost said no, and I am so glad I didn't. Stephen arrived late, sat down across from me, and apologized to the whole table with this slightly embarrassed smile that I could not stop looking at for the rest of the evening. We talked until the restaurant closed. He walked me to my car and asked for my number, and I gave it to him before I even thought about it. We dated for just over 2 years. He was thoughtful and steady and easy to be around in a way that I hadn't experienced before. He remembered small things, the way I liked my coffee, the name of my childhood dog, the fact that I got anxious in loud crowded spaces and needed a quiet corner to recover. He made me feel seen in a way that was quiet and consistent rather than dramatic, and I think that's why I trusted him so completely. In 2 years together he had never once given me a reason to doubt him. Not once. He proposed on an ordinary morning in our kitchen while I was still half asleep. No restaurant, no audience, no grand gesture. Just him on one knee on the kitchen floor with a ring he had been hiding for 3 months, looking up at me like the answer to his question was the most important thing in the world. I said yes before he even finished asking. We planned the wedding for that October. An outdoor ceremony at a beautiful estate just outside the city, surrounded by old oak trees, open fields, golden afternoon light. 120 guests. My dress took 4 months to arrive and my mother cried every single time she saw me in it. And then, exactly 1 week before the wedding, I received a message from a number I didn't recognize. No name, no photo, nothing to identify who had sent it. Just a few short lines. The man you are about to marry has a past he never told you about. Find out the truth before it is too late. I stood in the kitchen and read it 3 times and felt something cold and uncomfortable move through me that I didn't want to examine too closely. I showed it to my best friend that evening. She said it was almost certainly someone jealous, someone trying to get inside my head right before the biggest day of my life, and that I should delete it and move on. I told myself she was right. I deleted it. I did not tell Stephen. I have thought about that decision every day since. The morning of the wedding was everything I had pictured. My bridesmaids were at the house early, it was loud and warm and beautifully chaotic. My father stood in the doorway when I came downstairs in my dress and didn't say a single word for almost a full minute. He just looked at me and nodded slowly, and that was more than enough. The estate was perfect when we arrived. Chairs arranged in long rows facing a floral arch at the far end of the lawn, the late afternoon light falling exactly as we had hoped, guests already seated and waiting. I stood just out of sight with my father, holding his arm, listening to the music begin. I took one long slow breath and thought about Stephen waiting for me at the end of that aisle and felt completely certain, completely ready. The music swelled and we began to walk. Stephen saw me the moment I came around the corner and the look on his face made everything else in the world disappear. I reached him, my father placed my hand in his and stepped back, and the officiant smiled and began to speak. I was holding Stephen's hands and looking at his face and thinking that every single thing in my life had led to exactly this moment. And then I heard footsteps on the gravel path behind the guests. I kept my eyes on Stephen and told myself it was nothing, a late arrival, someone who had gotten lost on the way in. But the footsteps didn't slow down and didn't find a seat, and I felt the attention of the entire room beginning to shift before anyone said a word, that specific silence that falls when something is wrong and everyone feels it at the same time. And then her voice cut through everything. She said it loudly and clearly, standing in the middle of the aisle in a dark coat with a document held out in front of her. She said this ceremony could not legally continue because Stephen was still her husband, and she had the paperwork to prove it. Every single person on that lawn went completely silent. I turned around and looked at her. I had never seen this woman before in my life. She was calm in a way that felt deliberate, almost rehearsed, like she had been preparing for this moment for a very long time. And then I turned back to Stephen, and what I saw on his face stopped me completely. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't the face of someone who had been caught. It was shock, pure, unfiltered, the kind that drains all color from a person in an instant. He looked at her and then he looked at me and said very quietly, "Kelly, I don't know who this is." But she was already walking forward. And the guests were murmuring. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a deleted message was screaming at me that I should have listened. The officiant stepped forward and said gently that under the circumstances the ceremony would need to be paused. My maid of honor appeared at my side and took my arm. And I stood there in my dress in the middle of all of it and made the only decision I could. I turned to our guests, and in a voice I still cannot believe was mine, I thanked them for coming and told them the ceremony would not be continuing. And I walked off that lawn on my own 2 feet without looking back once. The next few hours happened in a blur that I still struggle to put in the right order. Stephen and I ended up inside the estate, in a small side room that the venue coordinator quietly directed us to while the guests stood outside not knowing what to do with themselves. Dana came in after us. She sat down across from us at a small table and laid her document flat in front of everyone, and for the first time I saw it clearly. It was a marriage certificate. With both their names on it. Dated 4 years earlier. I looked at Stephen. And I asked him, very quietly, who she was. What came next was the hardest conversation of my life. Stephen told me that he had been married before, briefly, years ago, when he was very young and very foolish, and that it had ended badly and painfully and that he had never told anyone about it. Not his friends, not his family, not me. He said he was ashamed of it. He said he had buried it so completely that he had convinced himself it didn't need to be said. He said the divorce had been finalized and that he had the papers to prove it, and that he had genuinely believed it was over and done with and entirely in the past. Dana then said something none of us expected. She said she knew about the divorce papers. But she had received a letter months after the confirmation, from the state registry office, explaining that due to a processing error on a specific date, a number of legal filings had not been recorded in the system. Her divorce was among them. She said she had tried to reach Stephen through his attorney and received no response. And then she had waited. She had waited for exactly this moment, for the worst possible day, because she wanted him to feel what she had felt when he left. Stephen looked at her for a long moment and then he looked at me. And I stood up and walked out of the room. I went home that night and sat on the edge of my childhood bed in my wedding dress and didn't cry for a long time because I think I was somewhere past crying. There were 2 separate things breaking me at once and I couldn't separate them. The first was Dana and the registry error and the legal impossibility of what had almost happened. The second was bigger and quieter and much harder to name. Stephen had been with me for 2 years. 2 years of mornings and conversations and plans and promises. And there was an entire chapter of his life that he had decided I didn't need to know about. That was the thing I couldn't get past. I told him I needed time and I meant it. We did not see each other for 4 months. I went back to work, I spent time with my family, I talked to a therapist who helped me separate what I was actually feeling from what I thought I was supposed to feel. Some days I was furious. Some days I missed him so much it was physical. Some days I felt both things at the same time and didn't know what to do with either of them. I thought about the message I had deleted. I thought about what would have happened if I had told Stephen about it immediately, if we had found out together, if we had faced it before the ceremony instead of in front of 120 people. I thought about that a lot. Stephen called me 4 months after the wedding. That wasn't. He didn't ask to see me. He said he wanted me to know that everything had been legally resolved, that the registry error had been corrected, and that the divorce was now properly recorded. He said he had spent 4 months thinking about what he had done and that he understood if I never wanted to speak to him again. He said he missed me every single day. And then he said goodbye and hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for 12 minutes. And then I called him back. We met for coffee the following week. It was careful and awkward and nothing like the easy way we had always been together. And then somewhere in the middle of it he said something small and slightly ridiculous about the terrible coffee and I left before I could stop myself, and after that it was a little easier. We talked for 3 hours. He answered every question I asked, including the ones that were hard to ask and harder to answer. He told me why he had never spoken about Dana, not just to me but to anyone. He told me about the shame he had carried and the silence he had built around it. And I told him that the silence was what had hurt me most, more than Dana, more than the ceremony, more than any of it. He nodded and said, I know. And I am sorry. I won't do that again. I believed him. Not because I had forgotten what happened, but because I knew him well enough to know that he meant it. 6 months later we got married. Just the two of us and 2 witnesses at the county clerk's office on an ordinary afternoon. No flowers, no guests, no dress. He held both my hands in a small room with fluorescent lighting and we said our vows quietly, and it was the most peaceful moment of my entire life. Our daughter was born the following year. She is 2 years old now and she has Stephen's smile and absolutely no idea that her parents' first wedding was stopped by a woman in a dark coat holding a piece of paper. Last week she climbed into my lap while I was sitting on the couch and put both her small hands on my face and looked at me very seriously the way toddlers do, and then she said Mama and leaned her forehead against mine. Stephen was watching from across the room. He caught my eye and smiled. And I smiled back.